All right, guys, it's week 6 and we're going to start talking about form. And so in this video, I have 5 categories, I guess, of how you can get started with experimenting with form or trying different forms. And then perhaps, depending on how long that is, I might, in the second video, walk you through some experimental poems that I created through a class that I took at the Loft. Okay, so number 1 is something that we already were introduced to last week, which is line and stanza variation. And so last week we looked at how there's 2 kinds of lines, self-enclosed or enjambed. And so there's that. And then also there's line length. We talked a little bit about that. Your line might be longer or shorter than a breath. And then also for stanza, you might experiment with the number of lines per stanza. So you may have couplets, so you have 2-line stanzas, or you can just experiment with different numbers of line per stanza, and or repeating a pattern, even repeating a pattern such as long line, short line, and then just going on like that. So to start with, you can, before you're even thinking about like traditional forms or something too experimental, you can just simply consider line and stanza variations. And there's just so many possibilities just right there. So that's number 1, a good starting place. Number 2 is try a traditional form. And so one traditional form you might try would be a sonnet that I've mentioned before. A sonnet is 14 lines, it's rhyming, and it has a volta, which means that there is a turn, something shifts in the poem. And another form that's a traditional form that you might try might be an ode. Now, Sharon Olds has a book of odes, which I guess you could call it like a modern version of odes. If we look in our glossary for a quick definition of an ode, a celebratory poem in an elevated language on an occasion of public importance or on a lofty common theme. So I'm not sure if the odes here fit that traditional definition or if it's really like a new realm. But this is a really excellent book. I highly recommend it. And you could also just try something as simple as an ABAB rhyme scheme if you wanted to try a traditional form and you just wanted a simple starting point. Well, simple, of course, not that simple to rhyme, but it could be just a form that you're trying. And another way to try a traditional form is to look to Japanese poetry. So you're probably familiar with haiku, but haiku, you know that haiku has 575 syllables. You may not know that 575 is sometimes interpreted differently because going from the Japanese to the English, it may not necessarily have exactly 575 syllables in English. But you can read about that. Natalie Goldberg's book, 3 Simple Lines. You really don't need to read a whole book to know how to write a haiku because it is a form that is, approachable in its simplicity. But if you want to read a book that is kind of memoir-like and really delve into haiku, this is a good book. But a haiku is written in the present tense, almost always refers to a time of day or a season. It focuses on a natural image and captures the essence of a moment, and its goal is a sudden insight or spiritual illumination. So that part you may not have heard of before. So a little bit like what I just said about the sonnet with the volta is know that there is that other element to a haiku, which is showing a sudden insight or revelation. And a couple other Japanese forms that you could try are tanka and haiban. And those are forms that you could really just look up the form, read some examples online, and or in a reference book, and or actually I'll post a link of a place to see some examples, and just give it a try. So when we think of traditional forms, it's not just traditional forms from English. So Japanese form is a good thing to try. So that's number 1 and number 2. And number 3 is to emulate an interesting form from our Best American Poetry anthology, and just take inspiration from what other people have tried. I didn't really pull out examples, but we're going to look at those examples in class, or I think they're on your last week's notes as well. But there's so many interesting forms that others have tried. Just just try to emulate that, or you'll start to get a sense of how, oh, I could write a poem in that form, and you'll see all the possibilities. Okay, number 4 is to try a concrete or a visual poem. And I'm going to share a great little 5-minute video called How to Make a Visual Poem. And let me read you a quick definition of a visual poem. Let's see, I think it was under visual, I thought that I marked it. Oh no, under concrete poem, I think. Okay. Not that I marked the page. Oh, I marked it like this. It's right there. Okay. A poem of visual display, a form of spatial prosody. Each concrete poem presents itself in a different physical shape. All written poems have spatial dimension, but the concrete poem foregrounds the visual configuration, how a poem looks, and pushes the pictorial boundaries of poetry. All right, and again, in that video, you'll see some lovely examples of that. And that kind of leads into number 5, and just which is just to be as experimental as your imagination will take you. Explore metaphor through form, create a collage. So when it said pushing those boundaries, try just blurring the line between visual art and poetry. And of course, erasure is you could call that a type of experimental poetry. And there's an article by Solmaz Sharif, which I will also share with you. Okay, so since you have those in your notes, and we're at 8 minutes, I guess I can go ahead and go into some examples of experimental poems that I did in a class that I took. And they weren't necessarily like from a prompt exactly on what I created, but I'll just tell you what I can about my process. And I'm kind of just showing you. I can show you the I can show you in class as well, because just holding it up to the camera, you might not be able to quite see everything. Okay, so one week I remember my daughter was homesick, and I was noticing all of these things about her that I wanted to write about. And then at the same time, because she was homesick, she was distracting me from other work. And so I wanted to write a poem that captured the sense of her being both my muse and my distraction. So what I did was I knew that I wanted to write a margin to margin, very long, descriptive kind of poem that talked about some different things that I was experiencing with her. I'll just read a bit of it. Brushing her tangled bird's nest of beautiful but dry hair, her warm neck revealed with an upward sweep of the brush, a streak of caramel highlight through a chestnut strand. And then, so I just go on, and well, here's a nice example. A large glass jar and her array of blue aquarium stones and crystals still spread across a rock since before the pandemic, since before the ice storm, the hailstorm. They are still there with only a coat of dust, as if childhood could wait for you, but it hasn't. It hasn't. She was 7 when she last played out here unmasked with a friend, the pretend play of childhood, which aches away. So I knew that what I wanted to create was a lot of text, just a lot of text. So it's very kind of rambly, because what I wanted to do was to fragment that. And so then I took that text and I cut it just kind of like puzzle pieces, just big triangles. And then I had a second page of text that was just all her saying like, I don't feel well, my nose is stuffy, will you take my temperature, I want some ginger ale, can I play with your phone? All of those kinds of interruptions, so that the poem itself creates these, shows these interruptions and that fragmentation. And then this became like a collage. And then when I thought that I wanted to, maybe put this in a manuscript or tried to publish it, I realized that so much was missing from the narrative, which was the intention. And so it accomplished that, but then it was missing the whole narrative. So then I ended up putting it into another form, which I can share in class, in which I create this kind of fragmentation in shape, but having the text follow through to the next line. And I'll just show you that. I think this is more, I like this more as a visual poem, but unless I were to, I don't know, publish like a scan of this, like as if it was visual art, I don't know how I could share this. So that's just one experimental poem that I did. And let's see, we're at 12 minutes. So I think I'll just do a part 2 to this video, and I'll just pick up right where we left off with a few more examples, just in case this video is too long for you.